I stand frozen as my son Travis delivers crushing words about his father Frank's death and massive fortune. After 30 years of raising our son alone while Frank built his real estate empire, Travis coldly informs me I won't receive anything from the $74 million estate. The betrayal cuts deeper coming from my own child, who I sacrificed everything for. What Travis doesn't know is that I never wanted Frank's money, but his cruel dismissal of my life's work awakens something dormant inside me. The will reading tomorrow will change everything. I met Frank Sullivan during my sophomore year at the University of Washington. It was 1974, and I was studying business with dreams of opening my own accounting firm someday. Frank was in his final year of economics, full of ambitious plans but perpetually broke. He had that magnetic charisma that drew everyone in, that sparkle in his eye when he talked about building something great. Our romance was a whirlwind. Within 6 months, he proposed with a tiny diamond ring he bought on installment payments. We married when I was 22, bright-eyed and believing in his vision. Frank had big dreams but no practical plan to achieve them. He talked endlessly about real estate development, about transforming neighborhoods and creating wealth. What he lacked was capital and connections. While Frank networked and pitched ideas to anyone who would listen, I took on multiple jobs to keep us afloat. During the day, I worked at a local accounting firm, and evenings I waited tables at Hartley's Diner downtown. Every dollar I saved went into what Frank called our Empire Fund. I believed in him completely. When I became pregnant with Travis 2 years into our marriage, we were still living in a one-bedroom apartment with secondhand furniture. I continued working both jobs until I was 7 months along, my feet swelling in my waitress shoes, determined to build our safety net. After Travis was born in 1977, I made the decision to pause my own career aspirations. Frank insisted he was on the verge of his big break, and one of us needed to be home with the baby. It seemed like the right choice at the time. I took on bookkeeping jobs I could do from home while caring for Travis. The turning point came when my grandmother passed away a year later, leaving me an inheritance of $22,000. It wasn't a fortune, but in 1978, it was enough to make a difference. Frank convinced me this was the capital he needed for his first real investment, a rundown fourplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood. I trusted him completely and signed over my entire inheritance. Frank used that money as a down payment, secured a mortgage, and Sullivan Properties was born. The fourplex was renovated, rented, and began generating income. Frank was elated, already planning his next acquisition. As Frank's business grew, his presence at home diminished. Days would pass without him joining us for dinner. When Travis took his first steps, Frank was in Portland looking at another property. For Travis's 3rd birthday, Frank showed up 2 hours late with an extravagant gift, as though that could make up for his absence. I was essentially raising Travis alone while running the household and handling the bookkeeping for Frank's growing business. I organized files, tracked expenses, prepared documents for his meetings, all without formal recognition or compensation. It was just what a supportive wife did. By the time Travis started elementary school, Frank had acquired 12 properties and hired his first employees. He leased a real office space with his name on the door. Success changed him. The warm, ambitious man I married was replaced by someone increasingly controlling and distant. He scrutinized household expenses while buying himself luxury cars. He began criticizing my appearance, suggesting I didn't look the part of a successful developer's wife. Then came the late nights, the unexplained business trips, the lipstick stains I pretended not to notice. I confronted him once. He didn't even bother to deny it, simply saying, "This is what successful men do, Jordyn. You should be grateful for the lifestyle I provide." The final breaking point was Travis's 12th birthday. Frank missed it entirely for a critical business meeting that, thanks to a friend's phone call, I learned was actually a weekend in Lake Tahoe with his receptionist. I filed for divorce the following Monday. The divorce was brutal. Frank hired an aggressive attorney who portrayed me as a gold digger trying to profit from Frank's hard work. They argued that my contributions were minimal, that I was just a housewife while Frank built his empire through his own genius and determination. The judge awarded me our modest home and child support, but nothing from the business I had helped create. Frank's parting words still burn in my memory. "You'll regret crossing me, Jordyn. I built this empire despite you, not because of you." The most devastating betrayal wasn't discovered until months after our divorce was finalized. While organizing old financial documents, I found paperwork showing Frank had transferred my grandmother's inheritance, the seed money that started everything, into a separate account solely in his name just weeks after I had signed it over. He had been planning his escape from the beginning, ensuring that my contribution would never be officially recognized. Travis, at 12, was caught in the middle. Frank began wooing him with expensive gifts, sports cars, and exotic trips I could never afford. While I worked overtime to pay for Travis's school supplies, Frank was taking him to Lakers games in his private box. I watched helplessly as my son was gradually pulled into his father's orbit of wealth and status, learning to measure worth in dollars rather than character. The years following the divorce were the hardest of my life. I found myself at 37, essentially starting over. The child support Frank provided was the bare minimum the court required, often arriving late and always accompanied by a note reminding me it was more than I deserved. I took a full-time position at Wilson Accounting, while also picking up weekend bookkeeping jobs for small businesses. My dining room became my home office, with client files stacked alongside Travis's homework. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Despite Frank's attempts to turn Travis against me, I refused to speak ill of his father. When Travis would return from weekends at Frank's penthouse, eyes wide with stories of pool parties and celebrity encounters, I would simply listen and ask questions. Inside, my heart broke a little more each time, watching my son measure our simple home against his father's opulence and find it wanting. "Why don't we live like Dad does?" Travis asked once, 14 and sullen. "He says you chose to live this way because you're bad with money." Those words stung, but I simply replied, "Different people make different choices, Travis. I'm choosing to build something solid and honest." As Travis entered high school, I scraped together every penny to ensure he attended Westridge Preparatory Academy, the school he wanted. Frank could have easily covered the tuition but refused, saying, "Your mother wanted custody. Let her figure it out." I never told Travis about this. Instead, I took out a second mortgage and worked 60-hour weeks. During those years, I found unexpected support in Eleanor Matthews, an attorney I met when handling bookkeeping for her small practice. Eleanor was also divorced, raising a daughter on her own, and understood the challenges I faced. She became both my client and my closest friend, offering legal advice and emotional support when I needed it most. "You're stronger than you realize, Jordyn," Eleanor would tell me over coffee at her kitchen table. "And someday, Travis will understand the sacrifices you've made." With Eleanor's encouragement, I began building my own bookkeeping business. I started with 3 clients, working evenings and weekends. Gradually, Jordyn Sullivan Financial Services grew. By the time Travis was 17, I had 8 regular clients and had paid off the second mortgage. Travis, meanwhile, was growing more distant. He excelled academically but increasingly adopted Frank's materialistic values and dismissive attitude toward me. When I couldn't afford the brand-name clothes his friends wore, he accused me of embarrassing him. When I missed a school function because I was working late with a client, he didn't speak to me for days. "Dad says you're stuck in your ways," he told me once. "He says if you had any real ambition, you wouldn't be working out of our dining room." I wanted to tell him how his father had stolen my inheritance, how I had sacrificed my own dreams so Travis could have opportunities. Instead, I simply said, "We all define success differently, Travis." When Travis was accepted to Stanford University, I was bursting with pride. Frank immediately stepped in, loudly announcing he would cover all expenses. I should have been grateful, but I recognized it for what it was: another way to diminish my role in our son's life. Throughout Travis's college years, he would call with sudden emergency expenses, not covered by Frank's contribution: a special research program, a laptop replacement, study materials. I always found a way to provide what he needed, often going without basics myself to send him money. It wasn't until after Travis's graduation that I discovered the truth. Those emergency expenses had funded spring break trips to Cancun and expensive gifts for girlfriends. Travis had been playing both parents, collecting from me while knowing Frank's contribution more than covered his needs. This revelation came through an accidental meeting with his college roommate, who assumed I knew all about the trips and parties Travis had funded with my hard-earned money. "You must be so proud That Travis managed to have the full college experience while still graduating with honors, he said innocently, unaware of the bomb he was dropping. I confronted Travis during a rare visit home. He shrugged it off with disturbing casualness. Dad always said I should get what I can from you since you took so much from him in the divorce, he said, scrolling through his phone, barely making eye contact. Besides, you always acted like sending money was no problem. In that moment, I realized how completely Frank had poisoned my son against me. Travis had graduated with honors, but he had failed to learn compassion, honesty, or gratitude. The bright, loving boy I had raised was buried beneath layers of his father's toxic influence. Still, I held on to hope that maturity would bring wisdom, that someday Travis would see the truth. That hope dimmed considerably when Travis announced he would be joining Sullivan Enterprises immediately after graduation. Frank had created a special position for him, with a 6-figure salary and the title of Vice President of Development. Travis moved into a luxury apartment in Frank's building and stepped fully into the life his father had designed for him. Our relationship dwindled to obligatory holiday phone calls and the occasional dinner when Travis needed something. Each time, I would search his face for glimpses of the compassionate child I had raised, only to find Frank's calculating ambitions staring back at me. As Travis approached 30, our relationship had deteriorated to near estrangement. He canceled our monthly dinners more often than he kept them, always with a last-minute text about some urgent business matter with his father. When we did meet, he spent most of the time on his phone or recounting his latest achievements. Meanwhile, Jordyn Sullivan Financial Services had finally found solid footing. After 15 years of gradual growth, I now employed 3 full-time bookkeepers and had moved from my dining room to a proper office space downtown. My client list had expanded to include several successful local businesses, including a growing restaurant chain and a boutique hotel group. At 55, I had finally begun to create the business I had dreamed of in college, before Frank and his grand plans. Eleanor remained my closest friend and occasional legal advisor. She had watched me struggle and survive, and now celebrated my hard-won success. "You should be proud," she told me during one of our regular lunch dates. "You built this on your own, brick by brick, while raising a son. That's more than most accomplish in a lifetime." I appreciated her words, but couldn't ignore the pain of Travis's rejection. Success felt hollow without family to share it with. The growing divide between us took an even more troubling turn when I learned Travis and Frank had been socializing with some of my clients. At first, I thought it was coincidence Seattle's business community wasn't that large after all. Then Jake Masterson, owner of Masterson's Fine Furniture and one of my oldest clients, mentioned casually that Travis had offered to introduce him to a better financial management team at a charity gala. "I told him no one could provide the personal touch you do, Jordyn," Jake assured me. "But I thought you should know." Over the next few months, 3 more clients reported similar approaches. Frank and Travis were systematically targeting my client base, attempting to undermine the business I had built from nothing. It was a calculated attack on my livelihood, and it bore Frank's signature vindictiveness. Eleanor urged me to document everything. "This is not just petty, it could constitute tortious interference," she explained, her legal mind analyzing the situation. "Start keeping detailed records of every interaction, every client report. We may need it someday." I followed her advice, creating a secure file of documents and testimonials. I hoped I would never need to use it, but I had learned the hard way not to underestimate Frank's capacity for cruelty. In the midst of this business battle, I received disturbing news from an unexpected source. Linda Blackwood, a nurse at Seattle Presbyterian, was an acquaintance through our children's former school. She called me one evening with information she felt I should know. "Frank Sullivan was admitted yesterday," she said quietly. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I'm breaking all kinds of rules telling you this, but I thought you should know, especially since you're Travis's mother." I sat in stunned silence, processing this information. Frank, the seemingly invincible force that had shaped and damaged so much of my life, was facing mortality, and Travis hadn't said a word to me. I called Travis immediately. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice guarded. "I just heard about your father," I said. "I'm so sorry, Travis. Why didn't you tell me?" There was a long pause before he replied coldly, "It's being handled privately. Dad doesn't want people knowing his business, especially not you, Travis. Regardless of what happened between your father and me, I would never wish this on him. If there's anything I can do—" "There isn't," he interrupted. "Dad has the best care money can buy. The last thing he needs is you showing up with fake concern." The conversation ended there, with Travis making it clear I was to remain an outsider to this family crisis. I respected his wishes, though it broke my heart to think of my son dealing with this alone. 2 months later, Travis texted to cancel our scheduled dinner, the 4th cancellation in a row. This time, however, he included a photo. It showed a beaming Travis standing beside a striking blonde woman, both dressed formally for what appeared to be an engagement party. The caption read simply, "Meet Melissa. Dad approved." I stared at my phone, trying to process this information. My son was engaged, and I was learning about it through a casual text. No call, no introduction. Just another reminder of my peripheral role in his life. I learned later through social media that Frank had hosted an elaborate engagement party at his penthouse. Every significant person in Travis's life had been there except me. I wasn't even invited. Posts showed a smiling Frank, visibly thinner but standing proudly beside Travis and his future daughter-in-law. It was Eleanor who finally said what I had been avoiding. "Jordyn, I love you like a sister, and it kills me to see you chase after Travis's approval. At some point, you need to accept that Frank has won this battle. Travis has chosen his side." "He's my son," I protested weakly. "Yes," she agreed, "and you've been a wonderful mother, but you can't force him to appreciate that. Some lessons people have to learn on their own, often the hard way." The final shock came a week later. A manila envelope arrived at my office with no return address. Inside was a stack of yellowed documents, partnership agreements, investment contracts, and banking records from the early days of Sullivan Properties. Among them was a document I had never seen before, an original partnership agreement listing Jordyn A. Sullivan as a silent partner with 40% ownership in the first 3 property developments Frank had undertaken. My signature was on the document, a signature I recognized but had no memory of signing. Attached was a sticky note in unfamiliar handwriting. "Found these while digitizing old files. Thought you should have them." Not everyone agreed with how things were handled. I immediately called Eleanor, who reviewed the documents with growing amazement. "Jordyn, these are authentic. This agreement was never dissolved. Legally speaking, you could still have claim to 40% of those original properties and potentially their derivatives." I sat in stunned silence, staring at proof of what I had always known, that I was instrumental in building Frank Sullivan's empire, regardless of how he had rewritten history. "Why would someone send these now?" I asked. Eleanor's expression was thoughtful. "Someone with access to Frank's archives. Someone who knows he's dying and wants to set the record straight." The implication hung in the air between us. Someone inside Frank's organization had sent me ammunition, possibly for a legal battle that would shake Sullivan Enterprises to its foundations. Frank's condition deteriorated rapidly. I learned this not from Travis, but from Linda, my nurse contact, who continued to update me despite the professional risk. She described Frank as growing weaker but more reflective, often staring out his hospital window for hours. "He asks about Travis constantly," Linda told me during one of our calls. "But yesterday he asked about you." My breath caught. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if you had remarried, if you were happy." I told him I didn't know you well enough to say. This glimpse into Frank's thoughts unsettled me. After decades of animosity, why would he suddenly wonder about my happiness? 2 weeks later, I made an impulsive decision to visit the hospital. I knew Travis would be furious if he found out, but something compelled me to see Frank one last time. I arrived during evening visiting hours, flowers in hand, heart pounding. The nurse at the station, not Linda, directed me to room 412. I took a deep breath and knocked softly before entering. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The powerful, intimidating man who had dominated so much of my life lay diminished, tubes connecting him to various machines. His once thick hair was gone, his face gaunt. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had once made my heart race, widened in recognition. Before I could speak, the door burst open behind me. Travis stormed in, face contorted with fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, stepping between me and his father's bed. "Who let you in?" I just wanted. Get out, Travis hissed. You have no right to be here. Dad doesn't want to see you. From the bed, Frank made a weak sound, his hand lifting slightly. Travis ignored him, continuing to push me toward the door. You've always been like this, he spat. Always trying to insert yourself where you're not wanted. Dad built everything to spite you, not because of you. And now you show up for what? To see what else you can take? The cruelty in my son's face, so reminiscent of his father at his worst, broke something in me. I placed the flowers on a side table and left without another word, Travis's accusations echoing behind me. In the hallway, Linda found me fighting back tears. She guided me to an empty waiting area. I'm sorry, she said. Travis has been like that with everyone lately. The doctor says it's grief, but she hesitated. There's something you should know. Frank has been making changes to his legal affairs. His lawyer has visited 3 times this week. Before she could elaborate, her pager beeped. With an apologetic glance, she hurried away, leaving me to wonder what changes Frank could be making as he faced the end. 4 days later, at 9:16 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Travis. Dad passed at 6 a.m. Service private. Do not attend. No call. No recognition that I had once been this man's wife, the mother of his only child. Just a cold directive to stay away. I sat at my kitchen table, unexpected tears falling. I wasn't mourning the man Frank had become, but perhaps the young man I had once loved, the father of my son. That evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Travis stood on my porch, immaculately dressed in a black suit, but with eyes red from either tears or lack of sleep. He brushed past me without waiting for an invitation. The will reading is tomorrow at 10, he said without preamble, pacing my living room. Dad's attorney insisted I tell you. Travis, I'm sorry about your father, regardless of our history. He cut me off with a dismissive wave. Save it. I'm only here because Wilson insisted. The old man's paranoid about following proper procedures. His expression hardened. But let me be clear. Don't expect a dime from Dad's estate. Not 1 single cent. The vehemence in his voice took me aback. I never asked for anything, Travis. He laughed bitterly. Right, the Martyr Act. Well, just so you know, Dad built Sullivan Enterprises into a $74 million company. All of it, every property, every account comes to me. He made damn sure of that. The number was staggering. I knew Frank had been successful, but hearing the actual figure, $74 million, made concrete just how vast the empire had grown from that first fourplex purchased with my grandmother's inheritance. I don't care about the money, I said quietly. I never did. Sure, Travis sneered. That's why you've been sending that lawyer friend of yours to sniff around Dad's old records. You think I don't know about that? I frowned in confusion. What are you talking about? Eleanor hasn't... Save it, he interrupted again. The will reading is at Wilson's office. Show up if you want to embarrass yourself. I'm done here. He strode toward the door, then turned with a final parting shot. You know what Dad told me before he died? He said you were the biggest mistake he ever made, that everything he built was to prove you wrong. The door slammed behind him, leaving me stunned and confused. Eleanor had never investigated Frank's records. She wouldn't have done so without telling me. And those partnership documents had arrived anonymously. What was Travis talking about? I spent that night sorting through old boxes, pulling out photographs and papers from my life with Frank. Our wedding photo. The birth announcement for Travis. Property records for that first fourplex. Tax documents I had meticulously prepared. It was like archaeology, excavating a buried civilization. Around midnight, I found something I had forgotten. A small leather journal I had kept during the early years of our marriage. In it, I had documented every contribution to our empire fund, including my grandmother's inheritance. Every dollar was recorded in my careful handwriting, alongside notes about Frank's early acquisitions. On the last page, a note in my handwriting. Frank had me sign papers today for the Westlake property. Too busy with Travis to read them all. Frank says it's just formality, making me silent partner to protect assets. We'll get copies next week. I stared at those words, written by a younger, more trusting version of myself. The partnership agreement I had recently received, I had signed it. I just hadn't understood its significance at the time. Early the next morning, Eleanor arrived at my house. I had called her at dawn, explaining everything: Travis's accusations, the mysterious documents, my journal discovery. She examined the journal entry carefully. This corroborates the partnership agreement. Jordyn, if this is authentic, you may have legal claim to a significant portion of Sullivan Enterprises. What should I do? Her expression was solemn. Attend the will reading. Listen carefully. Don't volunteer any information unless directly asked. And Jordyn, bring these documents with you. As she was leaving, my doorbell rang again. A young woman in scrubs stood there, Sarah, a nurse I recognized from my hospital visit. Mrs. Sullivan? I promised I would deliver this, she said, handing me an envelope. Mr. Sullivan insisted, once he knew his time was short. With shaking hands, I accepted the envelope. Inside was a single page of unsteady handwriting. Jordyn, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've made mistakes too many to count. The worst was how I treated you. The truth is, I could never have built anything without you. Your inheritance, your support, your belief in me. I've made changes to my will. It won't fix everything, but it's a start. Frank. I stared at the letter, my vision blurring with tears. After all these years, a confession, an apology of sorts, and apparently some kind of restitution. When did he write this? I asked Sarah. 3 days ago. He made me promise to deliver it personally, not to his son, not to his lawyer. Only to you. As Sarah left, Eleanor read the letter, her expression shifting from surprise to determination. Whatever Frank has done, she said, it's changed the game. Let's find out what's in that will. The offices of Wilson, Brecht, and Associates occupied the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise, with panoramic views of Elliott Bay. As Eleanor and I stepped off the elevator, I straightened my navy blue suit jacket, suddenly conscious of its modest quality compared to the obvious luxury surrounding us. Remember what we discussed, Eleanor murmured. Listen first, react later. The receptionist led us to a large conference room already half filled with people. Travis sat at one end of the polished mahogany table, Melissa beside him. He stiffened visibly when he saw me, leaning over to whisper something that made her glance in my direction with undisguised curiosity. Several men in expensive suits, business associates of Frank's, I assumed occupied other seats. They barely acknowledged our entrance, their expressions ranging from boredom to impatience. None of them looked like they were grieving. This was business, not a memorial. Mr. Wilson, a silver-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses and an immaculate suit, entered last. I recognized him as Frank's longtime attorney, though we had only met briefly during the divorce proceedings 25 years earlier. He nodded professionally in my direction before taking his position at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," he began, opening a leather portfolio. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Franklin James Sullivan, as amended on April 28th of this year." Travis shifted forward slightly at the word amended, his brow furrowing. "What amendment?" he interrupted. "Dad didn't mention any changes." Wilson peered at him over his glasses. "The amendment was properly executed and witnessed, Mr. Sullivan. If you'll allow me to proceed." He began with the standard legal language, then moved to specific bequests: Frank's collection of vintage watches to his brother Robert, his art collection to the Seattle Art Museum, generous donations to cancer research and his alma mater. Travis grew increasingly impatient, drumming his fingers on the table. "And now, to the matter of Sullivan Enterprises," Wilson continued. As the sole owner and chief executive officer, Franklin Sullivan controlled assets valued at approximately $74 million at the time of his death. Travis straightened in his chair, a satisfied smile beginning to form. "However," Wilson said, adjusting his glasses, "recent discoveries have brought to light certain founding documents of Sullivan Enterprises that necessitate clarification." The smile vanished from Travis's face. "What discoveries?" Wilson extracted a document from his portfolio, one I immediately recognized as identical to the partnership agreement I had received anonymously. This original partnership agreement, dated February 12, 1978, establishes that Sullivan Enterprises was founded as a partnership between Franklin Sullivan and Jordyn Sullivan, with a 60-40 ownership split. The room erupted in murmurs. Travis shot to his feet. "That's impossible! Dad was the sole owner. He built everything himself. Wilson remained calm. The document is authentic, Mr. Sullivan. Your father acknowledged as much in his final amendment. He turned a page in his portfolio. I quote, I, Franklin James Sullivan, hereby acknowledge that the initial capital for Sullivan Enterprises came from Jordyn Sullivan's inheritance, and that she was legally established as a 40% partner in the original entity, though subsequently denied recognition or compensation for this role. Travis's face drained of color. He looked from Wilson to me with growing horror. This is fraud, he insisted, his voice rising. She manipulated him when he was dying. I'll contest this. There is more, Wilson continued implacably. The final amendment includes a personal statement from your father that he insisted be read in its entirety. He lifted another document and began to read. For 25 years, I have perpetuated a lie that I built Sullivan Enterprises entirely through my own efforts. The truth, which I have run from for too long, is that without Jordyn's financial contribution and support in the early years, there would be no Sullivan Enterprises. The initial properties that form the foundation of our current holdings were purchased with her grandmother's inheritance, which she generously contributed to our shared dream. I sat frozen, hearing Frank's words I had never expected to hear being read aloud. Around the table, expressions ranged from shock to calculation. In recognition of this truth, Wilson continued, and in an attempt to correct a long-time injustice, I hereby direct that 40% of Sullivan Enterprises, representing Jordyn's original partnership stake, plus reasonable interest, be transferred to her name immediately upon my death. Travis slammed his fist on the table. This is insane. She brainwashed him. He would never. Wilson held up his hand. Mr. Sullivan insisted on recording video testimony to accompany this amendment, specifically to address any concerns about his mental capacity or undue influence. He pressed a button on a remote, and a large screen on the wall illuminated. Frank's gaunt face appeared, propped up in his hospital bed but with eyes clear and determined. I, Franklin James Sullivan, being of sound mind and under no coercion, make this statement freely, the recording began. Frank's voice was weak but resolute. For too long, I have denied the truth about the founding of Sullivan Enterprises. My pride and anger prevented me from acknowledging Jordyn's crucial role in establishing what would become our family legacy. On screen, Frank took a labored breath before continuing. The truth is simple. Jordyn contributed her entire inheritance to purchase our first properties. She supported our family while I focused on growing the business. She maintained our books and records without compensation. Without her, there would be no Sullivan Enterprises. Travis watched the screen with mounting horror, his complexion ashen. Beside him, Melissa's eyes darted between her fiancé and me, her expression unreadable. I make this amendment not under duress, but in recognition of a debt long overdue, Frank continued. Travis, if you're watching this, know that this does not diminish your inheritance. A 60% stake in a company built on honesty is worth more than full ownership of an empire built on lies. The video ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. I realized I was trembling, overwhelmed by this unexpected vindication after decades of erasure. Wilson cleared his throat. The amendment continues with specific instructions for implementation, but the essence is clear. 40% ownership of Sullivan Enterprises transfers to Jordyn Sullivan, effective immediately. Travis finally found his voice. I'll fight this, he said, trembling with rage. I'll take this to court. He wasn't thinking clearly. That would be ill-advised, Wilson replied coolly. Your father anticipated your reaction and took pains to ensure this amendment would withstand any challenge. The video testimony is merely one safeguard among many. Travis turned to me, his face contorted. You did this. Somehow. You got to him in the end. Was this your plan all along? Waiting until he was weak and dying to manipulate him? Before I could respond, Melissa laid a hand on Travis's arm. Travis, please. This isn't helping. He shook her off. Don't tell me to calm down. She's stealing my birthright. From what I just heard, Melissa said quietly, she's receiving recognition for her contribution. There's a difference. Travis stared at her in disbelief. Whose side are you on? Yours, she replied steadily. But I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear what your father just said. Wilson intervened. If we may continue, There are additional provisions regarding the transition of management and board structure. As Wilson proceeded with the technical details, I found myself unable to fully process what had just happened. After decades of being written out of the Sullivan Enterprises story, Frank had finally acknowledged my role. The company I had helped create but had been denied any part in, I now owned 40% of it. Across the table, Travis's shock was hardening into cold fury. His gaze fixed on me promised this was far from over. The battle for Frank's legacy was just beginning. The news broke the following day. The Seattle Business Chronicle ran the headline, "Sullivan Enterprises Shock. Founder's ex-wife inherits 40% stake." Business reporters began calling my office. Photographers appeared outside my modest home. Overnight, I had become a person of interest, the woman who now controlled a significant portion of one of Seattle's largest real estate empires. Travis wasted no time mounting his challenge. 3 days after the will reading, I was served with legal papers contesting the amendment. His legal team, led by Howard Breckman, one of the city's most aggressive attorneys, alleged that Frank had been unduly influenced during a period of diminished capacity. Eleanor immediately stepped in, bringing with her a team of litigation specialists from her firm. "This is going to get ugly," she warned as we reviewed Travis's filing. "They're claiming you manipulated Frank when he was vulnerable. They'll dig into every interaction you had with him in his final months." "But I barely saw him," I protested. "Just that one hospital visit when Travis threw me out." Eleanor nodded. "That works in our favor. So does Frank's video testimony and the original partnership documents. But Travis has resources, and he's desperate." The battle quickly spilled into the media. The Seattle Times ran a profile on me, headlined "The Silent Partner," how Jordyn Sullivan helped build an empire, only to be written out. It painted a largely sympathetic picture, highlighting my years as a single mother building my own business while raising Travis. Travis countered with carefully planted stories in business publications, questioning my qualifications to hold such a significant stake in Sullivan Enterprises. Sources close to Travis Sullivan were quoted expressing concerns about destabilization of leadership and erosion of investor confidence. My clients rallied around me. Jake Masterson was the first to speak publicly in my defense, telling reporters, "Jordyn Sullivan built my company's financial systems from the ground up. If she did half as much for Sullivan Enterprises, they're lucky to have her input." Others followed, providing testimonials about my business acumen and integrity. These shows of support sustained me as the legal battle intensified. Travis's team deployed every tactic to delay and complicate the proceedings. They filed motions for extensive discovery, demanded years of my financial records, and sought to depose everyone who had contact with Frank in his final months. 2 weeks into this process, Eleanor received an unexpected call from someone inside Sullivan Enterprises. Deborah Chang, the company's longtime records manager, wanted to meet privately. We met her at a quiet cafe outside the city. A petite woman in her 60s with short gray hair and alert eyes, Deborah got straight to the point. "I was the one who sent you the partnership documents," she admitted. "I've worked for Sullivan since 1982. I knew you, Jordyn, back when you used to bring Travis to the office in his stroller." She pushed a flash drive across the table. "I've been digitizing the archives for years. These are copies of everything from 1978 to 1985. Frank's early journals, correspondence, loan applications listing your inheritance as the source of initial capital, bank transfers. It's all there." I stared at the small device. "Why are you doing this?" Deborah's expression softened. "Because I watched Frank build that company on your foundation and then erase you from the story. When he was dying, he asked me to find the old partnership documents. I think he wanted to make things right." Eleanor carefully picked up the flash drive. "Are you willing to testify to this?" Deborah hesitated. "I'm retiring next month. After that, yes." The evidence on Deborah's flash drive proved invaluable. Frank's own handwritten journals documented my financial contribution and my work managing the books in those early years. Loan applications explicitly referenced capital from wife's inheritance as collateral. It was a goldmine of corroboration. Armed with this evidence, Eleanor petitioned the court for a summary judgment. "They can't argue with Frank's own words," she said confidently. Travis, however, had one more card to play. A week later, his team produced affidavits from 2 of Frank's old business associates, claiming they had overheard Frank complaining about being strong-armed into changing his will. The judge, concerned about these conflicting narratives, ordered mediation before allowing the case to proceed to trial. The mediation was scheduled for 3 weeks later at a neutral law office. Travis arrived with Breckman and 2 junior attorneys. I came with Eleanor and her team. For the first time since the will reading, Travis and I would be in the same room, face to face. The mediator, a retired judge named Patricia Longmire, established ground rules before bringing us together. "This is not about winning," she emphasized. "It's about finding a resolution both parties can accept." When we finally sat across from each other in the conference room, I barely recognized my son. The Travis I had raised thoughtful, bright-eyed, eager to please, was gone. In his place sat a hard-eyed stranger, jaw clenched, regarding me as an enemy. Breckman opened aggressively. "My client is prepared to offer a one-time payment of $2 million to settle this matter, contingent upon Mrs. Sullivan relinquishing all claims to Sullivan Enterprises and signing a non-disclosure agreement." Eleanor's response was measured. "That's not remotely close to the value of a 40% stake in a $74 million company. The offer is declined." "The company is only valued that high on paper," Breckman countered. "And Mrs. Sullivan has no experience managing an enterprise of this size. Her involvement would devastate shareholder value. Yet without her initial investment, there would be no enterprise," Eleanor replied. The mediation continued in this vein for hours, with proposals and counter-proposals. Travis barely spoke, letting his attorney do the talking while he glared at me across the table. During a break, I found myself alone in the hallway with Melissa, who had been sitting quietly beside Travis throughout the proceedings. To my surprise, she approached me. "Mrs. Sullivan, I want you to know." She hesitated. "This isn't what I expected when Travis and I got engaged. The man I'm seeing in there isn't the man I agreed to marry." I studied her face, young but not naive, troubled but resolute. "Travis is under tremendous pressure right now," I offered. Melissa shook her head. "It's more than that. The things he's saying about you, the way he's handling this, it's making me question everything." She lowered her voice. "He told me something once, when he'd had too much to drink. He said his father had confided in him years ago that the business was built with family money that Frank had been clever enough to secure for himself." I felt a chill. "He knew?" Melissa nodded. "I think on some level, he's always known the truth about your contribution. That's why he's fighting so hard now, not just against you, but against his own conscience." Before I could respond, the door opened, and we were called back in. The afternoon continued with more proposals, more rejections. Travis grew increasingly agitated as the hours passed. Finally, after a particularly dismissive comment from Breckman about my supposed contribution, Travis exploded. "Enough," he shouted, surprising everyone. "Just stop with the supposed and alleged bullshit. We all know she put up the money. Dad told me himself years ago." The room fell silent. Travis seemed shocked by his own outburst. "Travis," Breckman began cautiously, "perhaps we should take another break." "No," Travis said, suddenly deflated. "No more breaks. No more lies." He looked directly at me for the first time that day. "Dad told me when I was 22. He was drunk, celebrating some acquisition. He laughed about how he'd managed to build an empire with your money while cutting you out of the rewards." The admission hung in the air. Judge Longmire leaned forward. "Mr. Sullivan, are you acknowledging that you were aware of your mother's financial contribution to the founding of Sullivan Enterprises?" Travis closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had shifted. "Yes," he said quietly. "I've always known." Melissa reached for his hand, but he pulled away, standing abruptly. "I need air." He walked out, leaving his legal team in disarray. Breckman called for a recess, following his client out. Eleanor turned to me, eyebrows raised. That was unexpected. Judge Longmire sighed. "Perhaps we should adjourn for today. It seems Mr. Sullivan may need time to reconsider his position." As we gathered our things, Melissa approached again. "He's on the roof terrace," she said. "I think he might be ready to talk. Really talk." I found Travis standing at the railing, looking out over the city, a skyline partly shaped by Sullivan properties. "Your father was very good at what he did," I said, joining him at the railing. "The business succeeded because he had vision and determination. My money just gave him the start he needed. Travis didn't look at me. Why didn't you fight harder back then? When he pushed you out? It was a question I had asked myself countless times. I was focused on you, I answered honestly. On giving you stability. On protecting you from the worst of the conflict. By the time I realized what I'd lost, it seemed too late to fight back. And now? Now I just want what's fair, recognition of my contribution, a seat at the table I helped build. Travis finally turned to face me. I don't know how to undo 25 years of believing Dad's version of everything. You don't have to undo it all at once, I said. Just be open to a new perspective. We stood in silence for several minutes. Finally, Travis spoke again. I need to talk to my team. I think we can find a better way forward than fighting this out in court. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet. But it was an opening, a crack in the wall that had stood between us for so many years. The next day, Travis's team presented a new proposal. I would receive 35% ownership of Sullivan Enterprises, with guaranteed board representation. Travis would retain controlling interest with 65% and would continue as CEO. We would issue a joint statement acknowledging my historical contribution and emphasizing our shared commitment to the company's future. Eleanor raised her eyebrows. It's a significant concession. Do you want a counter? I thought about what I really wanted. Not victory over my son. Not control of a company I hadn't been part of for decades. Just recognition, justice, and perhaps a chance to rebuild my relationship with Travis. I'll accept, I said, with one additional condition. 1 month after our mediation breakthrough, I sat in a conference room at Sullivan Enterprises for the first board meeting since the settlement. The 35th floor offered panoramic views of the city I'd called home all my life. Around the polished table sat the company's executives, most regarding me with cautious curiosity. At the head of the table, Travis maintained a professional demeanor, neither warm nor hostile. Our settlement had been finalized 2 weeks earlier. I had accepted the 35% ownership stake and board position, with my one additional condition, the establishment of the Sullivan Foundation for Single-Parent Education, funded with $5 million from the company reserves. The foundation would provide educational grants and business training for single parents working to build careers while raising children alone. The news coverage had been extensive. Business publications analyzed the power dynamics of the new arrangement. Human interest stories focused on the vindicated ex-wife angle. A few commentators speculated on what this meant for Travis's future leadership. Throughout it all, we had maintained the united front promised in our joint statement. But privately, things remained tentative between us. This board meeting was our first public test, mother and son, attempting to navigate a professional relationship while still sorting through decades of personal history. The next item on our agenda, Travis announced, is the formal introduction of our newest board member, Jordyn Sullivan, and a briefing on the Sullivan Foundation initiative. All eyes turned to me. I had prepared extensively for this moment, working with Eleanor to develop a presentation that would establish my credibility without threatening Travis's authority. Thank you, I began. Many of you know parts of my story already, but I'd like to properly introduce myself. While I haven't been involved with Sullivan Enterprises for many years, I was present at its creation. The company's first properties were purchased with capital I contributed, and I maintained the books during those crucial early years. I clicked through slides showing those original properties and their current values, modest buildings that had appreciated exponentially over the decades. My background since then has been in financial services. My firm, Jordyn Sullivan Financial Services, has managed accounting for over 50 Seattle businesses over the past 20 years. That experience informs my perspective as I join this board. I moved to the foundation proposal, outlining the structure, mission, and 5-year goals. This initiative isn't just about giving back, I explained. It's about recognizing that behind many successful businesses are unseen supporters making sacrifices and contributions that often go unacknowledged. Throughout my presentation, I watched Travis's reactions. His expression remained neutral, but I caught moments of surprise, perhaps at my professionalism, perhaps at how thoroughly I had prepared. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before Travis spoke. Thank you, Jordyn. Are there questions from the board? The questions were primarily technical, focused on the foundation's tax implications and governance structure. I answered each one clearly, occasionally deferring to Travis when appropriate. By the end, I sensed a subtle shift in the room, a tentative acceptance. As the meeting adjourned, Travis approached me. "That went well," he said stiffly. "The foundation concept is solid." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm hoping to involve Melissa in the planning committee, if she's interested." She mentioned her background in nonprofit work. Something flickered across Travis's face. Surprise, perhaps even gratitude. She'd like that. She's been struggling to find her place here. That brief exchange marked the beginning of a cautious thaw. Over the following weeks, Travis and I established a professional rapport. Our interactions remained formal, but the open hostility had dissipated. Melissa became our unexpected bridge, moving comfortably between us and gradually facilitating more personal conversations. 3 months after the settlement, Melissa appeared at my office unannounced, visibly nervous. "Travis and I have been talking," she said after accepting a cup of tea. "He's been doing a lot of thinking since the mediation. Seeing those documents, hearing his father's admission on video, it's forced him to reconsider a lot of what he thought he knew." "That can't be easy for him," I said carefully. "No, it isn't," she agreed, "but I think it's necessary. The thing is, we're still planning the wedding for spring, and—" She hesitated. "Travis is still figuring out how to say this himself, but he'd like you to be there. Not just there, but actually involved, if you'd be willing." The invitation was unexpected, a tender shoot of reconciliation pushing through hard ground. "I'd be honored," I said, blinking back sudden tears. "But only if he truly wants it, not because you're pushing him." Melissa smiled. "He wants it. He's just not good at finding the words yet." The wedding planning created natural opportunities for us to interact outside the boardroom. During one cake tasting, Travis tentatively broached the subject of his childhood. "I've been thinking a lot about how things were after you and Dad split up," he said, carefully studying a sample of lemon cake. "I don't think I ever really saw how hard you worked. Dad always made it sound like you had it easy." "Your father was good at controlling narratives," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Travis nodded slowly. "I'm starting to understand that. The thing is, I'm remembering things differently now, like how you never missed a school event, even though you were working all those jobs. Or how you would help me with homework no matter how tired you were." These small moments of recognition accumulated over time. Travis began stopping by my office occasionally with questions about historical company matters. I invited him and Melissa for dinner at my home, cooking the lasagna that had been his favorite as a child. Gradually, cautiously, we began reconstructing a relationship, not erasing the past, but building something new atop its complicated foundation. The most profound shift came 6 months after the settlement. The Sullivan Foundation was preparing to announce its first round of grant recipients. We had planned a small ceremony, with Travis and me jointly presenting the awards. The night before the event, Travis called me. "I've been working on my remarks for tomorrow," he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I want to say something about why this foundation matters to me personally, but I wanted to run it by you first. It involves talking about our history." "I appreciate that," I said. "What were you thinking of saying?" "The truth," he replied simply. "That I watched my mother build a life for us from nothing after the divorce. That I didn't appreciate what that meant until recently. That this foundation honors the kind of strength and perseverance you showed." I sat in stunned silence, overcome by the significance of this acknowledgement. "Is that okay?" he asked, misinterpreting my silence. "I don't want to overstep." "It's more than okay, Travis," I managed to say. "It means everything." The ceremony the next day was small but meaningful. 20 grant recipients, single parents balancing child-rearing with education or entrepreneurship, gathered with board members and local officials. When Travis rose to speak, I expected the polished, somewhat impersonal delivery I'd grown accustomed to in board meetings. Instead, he set aside his prepared notes and spoke directly, with an emotional openness I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "This foundation honors the unsung heroes who build foundations for others while receiving little recognition themselves," he began. "I know about this firsthand because I watched my mother do it." He turned toward me, his voice steady but full of meaning. "For too many years, I failed to see the sacrifices she made and the strength she showed in building a life for us after my parents' divorce. I believed a story that minimized her contributions both to our family and to the very company that bears our name. Today is about recognizing that kind of invisible contribution, not just in our grant recipients, but in my own history. In that moment, surrounded by strangers and colleagues, I felt a healing I had almost stopped believing possible. Not just the public vindication of my role in Sullivan Enterprises, but the much more precious acknowledgement from my son. The months that followed brought continued healing. Travis and Melissa were married in a beautiful spring ceremony where I was not just present but honored as the mother of the groom. The foundation flourished, gaining recognition for its targeted approach to supporting single-parent entrepreneurs. And Sullivan Enterprises, now guided by both a mother's financial wisdom and a son's dynamic vision, entered a new phase of growth. On my 65th birthday, Travis and Melissa hosted a small dinner at their home. As we finished dessert, Travis disappeared briefly, returning with a small package. "This isn't your real gift," he said, placing it before me. "That's being delivered to your house tomorrow. But this is something I wanted to give you privately." Inside was a framed document, the original partnership agreement from 1978, with both Frank's signature and mine clearly visible. Across the bottom, Travis had added a handwritten note, "The true foundation of Sullivan Enterprises, with love and gratitude." "I had it restored and preserved," Travis explained. "I thought you might want it for your office at the foundation." The gesture represented everything we had worked through: acknowledgement of the past, appreciation in the present, and commitment to the future we were rebuilding together. Later that evening, sitting on Travis and Melissa's terrace overlooking the city, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From a young bride investing her inheritance in her husband's dream, to a single mother struggling to provide, to a successful businesswoman fighting for recognition, and finally, to this moment of reconciliation and peace. "Penny for your thoughts?" Melissa asked, joining me with a glass of wine. "I was just thinking about legacy," I replied. "Not the financial kind, but what we really leave behind." For so many years, I thought my legacy was being erased. My contribution to the business, even my influence on Travis. But nothing is ever truly lost. The truth finds its way to the surface eventually. "It does," she agreed, "though sometimes it needs a little help." She glanced through the window to where Travis was on the phone, his expression animated as he discussed foundation business. "He's different now. More whole." I nodded, watching my son still, Frank's son in his drive and ambition, but with a growing capacity for reflection and humility that was entirely his own. We all are. The greatest wealth, I've learned, isn't measured in dollars but in restored relationships and hard-won wisdom. No court victory or financial settlement could have given me what matters most, the chance to truly be a mother to my son again, and through that relationship, to help shape a legacy of integrity and compassion that will outlast any business empire. What Frank never understood, and what Travis is finally learning, is that true success isn't built on what you accumulate, but on what you contribute, not just financially, but emotionally, ethically, personally. In acknowledging others' contributions to our success, we don't diminish our own achievements. We give them deeper meaning and more lasting value. If you've ever had your contributions overlooked or your worth questioned, I hope my story reminds you that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary, not just for you, but for everyone who might otherwise believe the false narrative about who you are and what you've done. Sometimes, the most loving gift we can give others is the opportunity to recognize the truth and make amends. Have you ever had to fight for recognition of your contributions, either in your family or professional life? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their invisible contributions matter too. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late for truth to prevail and relationships to heal.